This is all the JavaScript that you need to know to create your first website, so let's go. What console.log does is basically show the result of the thing you put inside the function inside the console. The console is inside the web, which you can access it by keying F12 on your keyboard, then at the top, clicking on console, and tada, this is the console. Then you may be asking, how and when to use the console? Good question. The first use case is to check whether the elements in the website actually works or not. Let's say I have a button and I want the button to log hello in the console when the button is clicked to check whether the button actually works. To do it, on the button head tag, I will put an onClick attribute which calls the click button function, which is an arrow function that will console log hello. Console.log can also be put in the flow of your code. It is used when you want to check whether this code before the console.log works or not. Because if it works, the code will theoretically move down to the next line. But if there is a problem or an error produced, the program will not continue to move down the code unless you tell it to do so. For example, let's say you are trying to fetch a user's details with this function. This function will simulate two scenarios: return a user or give a new error, to simulate producing an error if there is no user or something wrong with the user. Then the result of this function will be put in the constant user and log the user if successfully fetched. Let's see what happens when the user has no problem and no error. The result is logged in the console. Now, let's see what happens when there's an error or the user has a problem. There's an error produced in the console and the result is not logged successfully in the console. This will then tell you that there's a problem with the previous code and you will have to fix it. So that's the uses of console.log. By the way, if you need any help on your web programming journey, I created a Discord community where you can do so. There will be daily challenges, people who are interested in web programming, and it's for beginners to advanced web programmers. Feel free to join. Conditional rendering is used to produce a result if a condition is met, and produce another result if the same condition is not met. The result will either be true or false, which means whether the condition is met or not met. There are three methods of doing conditional rendering: if-else statement, logical AND operator, and ternary operator. Firstly, if-else statement. This is the most basic way to control what shows up. The default boolean is true, therefore the if line will always check if the condition is true. For example, in this code, you are checking if the condition is logged in is true. If it is, run the first block. If not, run the second. If you want to check if the condition is false, just add an exclamation mark in front. The second way of conditional rendering is logical AND operator. There are two methods of using this way. The first is to render something only if a condition is true. For example, this code says if is logged in is equals to true, then log will come back. Otherwise do nothing. It skips the else part. The second method is using it like a legit AND operator. What do I mean by that? The result of the operator will be true if all the condition is met. If any of the condition is not met, it will be false. This code produces a boolean as a result of the condition. In this case, the result is false because one of the value is less than 0, so the condition is not met. And the last way of conditional rendering is ternary operator. This is like a mini if-else statement in one line. For example, you can read this code like if is logged in is equals to true, do the first thing, otherwise do the second. So that is conditional rendering. Document Object Model or DOM is like a map or a blueprint of your website. It is also a way for JavaScript to see and interact with the HTML elements on your page. I've explained this concept in more detail in one of my videos, so do check it out. But I'll just explain the use cases here. With JavaScript and DOM, you can change the text on the page, add or remove elements, respond to user input like button click, and change the styles on the fly. These use cases are called DOM manipulation. The first one is changing the text on the page. The following code is how you can do so. By default, the text of the h1 tag is hello world, but because of the DOM manipulation below, the text is then changed to text change. The document gets the h1 element by ID, then change the text content to text changed. You can put the DOM manipulation in the button to see the change only when you click the button instead of automatically. The second use case is to add or remove elements. By default, there's only one item in the list. But because of DOM manipulation, the second item is added. The document gets a list and initializes it to the constant UL. The document then creates a list item element with the text of item 2, then append it to the list. And this is the result. The third use case is responding to user input. In this example, when the button is clicked, the document will get the paragraph element by ID from HTML and update the text content from nothing to button was clicked. The last use case of DOM manipulation is changing the styles dynamically. By default, the paragraph text have no style. but because of DOM manipulation, it added a style color weight to the element with the ID of text and added a font size of 24 pixels into it also. So these are the use cases of DOM. Event listener let your elements listen for something to happen, then run the function when it does. This is an example for event listener. I want the button to produce an alert to say button clicked when clicked. So I will let the document get the button element by ID of button, then add an event listener to listen to it for when the button is clicked, which then will produce a function that will produce the alert. To use event listeners is just like literally adding a pair of ears to an element, then tell it to do something if it heard the things that you want it to hear. The things that you can let it to hear are mouse over when the mouse hovers over something, key down when a key is pressed, submit when a form is submitted. I recommend trying this out and be creative on what the function you want to be produced for what you want to hear. The window object represents the browser tab or window. It is a global object of the browser. You can use it to show alerts, assess the size of the screen, get user location, control scrolling, and set timeouts and intervals. These are only some of the common things that you can do. Let's say you want the window to show an alert. You can write the following code, window alert, then the message. If you want to log the screen width, you can console.log a message, then window.inner width. If you want the window to scroll to the top of the page for some reason, maybe when you have a button that says scroll to the top for example, you can write window.scroll to 0, 0. And if you want to run something after 2 seconds for example, you can write the following code, window.setTimeout, and then 2 arguments. The first argument is a function, what you want to run. The second argument is the delay in milliseconds. 1000 milliseconds is equals to 1 second. Just a side note, set timeout doesn't block the rest of the code. JavaScript move on to the next line and move back to it later on after the timeout has passed. So yeah, these are all the JavaScript that you need to know for your first few websites. Anyways, that's my opinion. Bye.